Hello, friends and family. Do you ever experience burnout? When the stress becomes so much, becomes taxing enough that you need to take a prolonged period just to rest and recover. This episode's about burnout, and I'm going to share a fair amount about my personal story with burnout and the tools that have helped me to heal from and maintain my energy levels and regulation despite the stressors of modern day living. So first off, what is burnout? Now, I'm using kind of just an open umbrella term, nothing too medical or specific here. I'm referring to when the nervous system becomes very taxed, so the adrenals are putting out cortisol to regulate energy levels. And when we overstimulate the system, we're in too much sympathetic tone, too much yang energy. We're constantly using energy without recovering. We're constantly acting without resting. We're constantly moving without stillness. This is a tax on the system. It's a burden and it doesn't have the time to recover. And in our modern environment, this is becoming more and more of an issue for many people because we're constantly stimulating our mind and body. Stimulating our body with all the tasks and to-do lists, stimulating our mind with a constant stream of information from screens and from all the different tasks that people take on today. We're so multi-dimensional and we're parallel processing, and our minds had to deal with so many things that we didn't used to have to deal with back 100, 200, 300 years ago, yeah? So we have an increased burden of information. Burden can be a positive or a negative. I'm using it in a negative because we're talking about when it becomes deleterious stress, noxious stress for the system, when it's just too much that we can't live in harmony and balance, yeah? So when this becomes too much, the adrenals, they become, you could say, fatigued. They have a hard time maintaining their output, regulating the hormones of the body, and this causes dysregulation of the, every system. Your breathing system, notably. When the breathing system's off and the nervous system's dysregulated, every other system downstream from that is going to be out of regulation, including your digestion, your sleep and wake cycles, your lymphatic system, your immune system, yeah? So this affects every system. And my journey with burnout, as I track it back, the notable time when I began to really feel it in my system was when I moved to Squamish almost 6 years ago and started my business. And when I moved here, I didn't really know anybody. I'd met 2 or 3 people from a course I took. And I started a business and I quit my job. So we had financial stress. We had this new project. I started my business without knowing anything about business. I jumped on an opportunity, didn't make a business plan, didn't know anything about it. I just had this bright-eyed, bushy-tail attitude that if I just do it, it'll just work out. Reality check. There's a lot more to that. A lot more to that. So I jumped in and yeah, it didn't work out the way I wanted it. Clients didn't just roll in. Overheads a lot. I was working in Vancouver and Squamish in 2 different clinics and living on my own. And I started to overwork and I started to do because I never knew when enough was enough because I wasn't making enough to pay the bills each month. So I acquired some debt, particularly for the first 6 months of being out there. So when there's not enough clients in, it's like, I'm not going to stop working until I get some money, right? That was my thinking anyways. And over the next few years, COVID hit right after that. So that's another big stressor. I closed down my clinics for a time period. And then I'm in this like phase of, I've been in fight or flight for like 6 months of trying to get things going, right? And then a lot of the patterns that I picked up at that time, these survival-based patterns, not knowing when enough is enough, built into my system with a kind of momentum, an undealt with stress, you could say, of I've started this project and is it going to last or is it going to work or not? So I put my life on the line. I put my financial future on the line. I put my health on the line in order to make these things happen. So it encouraged me to be very young, which is not, I would say, my most dominant energy. I certainly have a lot of that, but I'm deeply introverted. And before I was doing business, I was not living like that. I was living quite balanced. I was practicing yoga. I was working 4 days a week, making good money, and I could live a very balanced work life, play life. So I threw out my system and I took on these challenges voluntarily. I chose to do these things. I put this pressure on myself, but I also put a lot of other pressure on myself to succeed and to continue to grow. And over the last few years, my business has grown. I'm no longer in fight or flight in terms of will I make enough each month, but I've taken on a lot of pressures to now succeed at a very high level. And I've continued to do schooling through the last about 5 years of continuing on with education and apprenticing with various different people. And I've added a lot of pressure on myself. And this is where we're going to get into breaking down burnout. And the way I'm going to do this is mindset, beliefs, how clarifying goals is really important, dealing with emotions, what imbalances are in the physical body, what actions you or I am taking in order to work with our burnout, supplementation, and then I'm going to offer the big 8, which I'll probably refer to before that, but 8 major things that we can look after in our day-to-day to maintain our holistic health. So I start with belief systems because they're the most subtle and most profound a lot of the time, because these are the underlying reason for action. So I mentioned enough, and enough comes up in multiple different streams of my belief systems as I untangled why I'm getting so burnt out. So do I have enough time? There was always this pressure of it didn't feel like there was enough hours in the day to do all the things. So it felt like I was always running behind. And then when is enough enough? As I mentioned, if I don't have the income coming in to pay my monthly because of a challenge I took on, when is enough enough? Because even just like jumping out of the situation isn't really an option because that's more stress. So I've put myself in this circumstance for my own growing and from a higher place of my best knowing. But when is enough enough for me to actually rest at the end of the day? And when I first started my business, what was I? I was around 27, 28 when I moved out here. A lot of energy. I was a very healthy, and I still am a healthy individual. So I had a big reserve of which I could pull from. And the habits of pulling from that energy reserve in the beginning were okay. I could maintain my energy levels. But for the last 3 years, I started to notice that infinite reserve of youth and what I had cultivated earlier in my life, not so infinite anymore. Hello, aging. And this was evident as I got more into things we'll talk about a little bit later. I don't want to jump away from the belief systems. There's a little bit more there. The another enough is, am I enough? Because once business started to have a certain stability in terms of finances and flow, there was also the, am I good enough to be offering the services I'm offering, to be charging what I'm charging? Am I good enough as a spiritual being to call myself a spiritual being? Am I good enough? Am I like fulfilling my highest purpose and dharma and my mission in this life? So these belief systems about enough time, when is enough enough, am I good enough, were fear-based limiting beliefs and motivators for incorrect action. And I know so much about holistic health and about yoga and about breathing that I had a lot of shame when I had my big burnout last year, because I know better on some level. Yeah. And many individuals may be similar to this. Many individuals may be not in the same way. But for me to know I know so much and to still go into this, at first I felt a lot of shame because I'm like, I'm out of integrity with all the things that I share to the world. Like, who am I? It was a lot of like, what have I done? But when I really tracked it at a deeper level, I realized, yes, there's a truth to that. And I can honor that and I can feel that because there are pieces that are out of alignment with what I say. And there's a higher level of integrity. There's always a higher level. And at the higher level, we're out of integrity at the lower level. So there's always a shifting, and I can honor where I've been at and where I'm at now. And when I truly started to do the work, like surrendered to the fact that, okay, this is an unsustainable pattern. I have to break down all the stuff which I'm going to share with you and go into it really deep. I'm like, oh, I can do this on my own. And I know this stuff so well, and I can create myself a very in-depth care plan, and I can analyze my behaviors because I am in integrity with who I am, and I know so much about this. So there was a lot of release within myself once I came to that. So I don't know if that's affecting anybody in their pathway of stress and burnout, but that's really important to be able to clear any shame or guilt that may come up around it, which may prevent sharing about it or even diving deeper into it because of avoidance patterns to feel those emotions. Yeah. So identifying the primary fear-based negative belief systems that are contributing to this, because these are motivating actions. So when I don't know when enough is enough, it's because I have a fear-based belief that at a very low level of my mind is like stimulating action. For example, when I'm living equanimously in my meditative life, I meditate every day and I practice yoga every day, which I have been consistently for over 8 years, even throughout this whole thing. But what happens when I'm stressed, I don't actually reach meditation proper. Meditation proper being a state of being that is not the thinking state. It's not concentration. It's beyond that. This isn't a meditation podcast. I have a whole podcast on that. So I'm not going to go deeper into what it is more than you need to know, which is it's a deep state of being rested in the center of the self. And you can't be in this beautiful state of meditation when you're stressed. So if I meditate and I'm really stressed, I'm not actually meditating. I'm practicing the preparatory practices of honing the correct qualities of mind, such as equanimity, and I'm learning to still my body. These are like the preparations for meditation to happen. So when I'm stressed, I'm still practicing meditation. I'm just not meditating. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, or there's too much arousal in my system because I'm stressed, and I'm sitting there stressed, which as a practice, that's excellent. I'm detaching from stimulation. This is very therapeutic. But what's happening in the example that I'm sharing here is that the fear-based beliefs have a charge that they're firing in my system because I'm resting. And this could be a time when I could detach, if I were to be successful in my meditation, where I could detach from what's active in my system, those fear-based beliefs, because it's, say, right before bed and I'm practicing meditation. The work is done for the day. I should be able to let it go, close down the tabs in the computer, have a deep rest where I can still my body and my mind. But if I still have fear-based beliefs that are running in my system, they say, you haven't done enough. There's still more to do. We still need to process this. And the mind doesn't sleep. So those fear-based beliefs don't allow for a deep rest in the system because they're not being properly dealt with. Not effectively in the meditation practice proper, not effectively in my other psychotherapeutic work of how I organize my mind, in how I plan my life. So that's really important to understand. You may sleep at night, but you may not rest deeply if the mind is running off of fear-based beliefs. So I needed to properly address my fear-based beliefs, and I needed to increase my meditation practice as two things that I needed to do in order to properly maintain regulation in my mind and body. So we could go really deep into beliefs and all these things, but I don't want to spend too much time on any one category because there's quite a bit. The next piece I want to talk about is clarifying goals, which was a really big piece for me that helped me to deal with my limiting beliefs and the circumstances that I had called in, with the pressures that I put on myself when starting a business and when taking on the various different apprenticeships and things that I have done over the past few years. Now, one of the big pieces for me, just as a personal share, is I did a 30-day writing challenge where I wrote every day about whether or not I wanted to be a father. And I've thought about being a father for years, and it's felt over the past few years like a yes. Most primarily in times in my life when I'm most aligned, like when I've done a bunch of fasting or I'm in a ceremony. And in these times, it's like I'm communicating with my soul at a really high level. I'm very connected with the deepest parts of me, and they're speaking and I can hear them. Whereas when I'm in my day-to-day, there can be a lot more noise, a lot more distraction pulling me away from my center and triggers that put me in my conditioning, rather than when I'm in that more aligned, deep level of communication with the deepest parts of me. Yeah. Anyway, so I did this challenge, and in the beginning it's like, yeah, totally. And then each day what I did is I put a percent, like yes, 100%, no, 0%. And it certainly wasn't 100 off the bat, but when I started out, it was like, okay, 80, 20, and 70, 30. And then it started to dwindle down. And then I got to a point where I was like, it's totally not what I want. It's totally not what I want, because all my fears and my doubts came to the surface and they pushed me away for various reasons. I'm not going to break down everything, but for time, for money, all the regular things you might think of. Yeah. So I was like, I'm going to give this its time in the day. So I was like, okay, let's visualize, step into over the next few days or however long I need to step into, okay, I'm not going to have children. Where does my mind go? How am I going to spend my time? How am I going to plan my life? And I started to plan. I started to look ahead at my goals. I have goals with children and in my timeline that I had been building since then, but I was like, okay, let's just scratch all that. What opens up? And so much opens up. My mind went cahoots. My mind was like, I can do this and I can do this. There's so much more freedom. And that felt really good. It felt very expansive. It felt like I could offer a lot of good value to the whole world through the practices and things that I could pursue in that time. Because I can't say from personal experience in this life, but taking years out of my time to have children and to pay for those children, it's a lot of energy. Yeah. So I gave it its time in the sun, and what it began to come down to was this, like, it was all about me and my time. And though there was this like guise of I can help more people, it didn't ring out as true. It didn't ring out in a way that felt as harmonious. And it felt more like a justification for the path to walk in that way. And it was very pleasing. It was very flavorful for my mind. But it was less nourishing from my heart. And as I began to think more deeply into it and feel into it, it began to once again ring more true that I would have children and that I wanted to be a father. And it didn't come down to, this looks like the most, you could say, like typical exciting pathway of like, oh my God, I can do all these things and it's going to be the best ever. It's like, oh, I have some lessons to learn, and they're not necessarily going to be easy. They're soul lessons. They're lessons about learning virtues and things that aren't just about me putting myself first in that way. It's about me, putting myself first in terms of my spiritual growth, and not just like the more of like the childish opinion of wanting what's going to be most pleasurable for my life and how I could plan it. So that rerouted me, and I got to a point where there was a deep level of certainty. Now, I'm not at 100% even in this moment, but I touched on a very high level of an aligned state where that felt completely resonant and true. And when it did, it was like the weight of responsibility of having a children. It was like I got somebody pregnant and I had that moment. I'm like, oh, this is a thing now, and I can't turn back. And in time, like in this moment, I can still fluctuate because I have free choice and I can go either way. But there's also now a deeper level of recognition of the momentum. The momentum is at least guiding me towards the pathway of having children. Don't worry, this is relevant to burnout. So as I stepped more deeply into this, the reality of it happening was in my body and mind stated as like, this is happening. It's like, start planning. And when I started to do that, I talk a lot about this. I got this from Bashar. Love and our goals act as the motivational mechanism and the organizing principle for our behaviors. So this is the key takeaway here. I found a level of clarity within myself on what my desires were and a future projection of what that might look like. And then my higher mind offered me information and intelligence. It is offering me information and intelligence on how I might organize myself so that I can act in accordance, so that I can set up the momentum of my energy, because I'm always planting seeds that are growing in different domains. Like I'm working along certain lines of development. Now, some of those lines of development I can carry through with this pathway of becoming a father because they're relevant. And other lines of the development, aka time, places where I spend my time and energy, are not so relevant for that. Or the amount of time I'm spending on certain things, not so relevant for that. So the clarification of goals and dreams became particularly relevant for me because of my struggles with the enough. Am I spending enough time doing this? When is enough enough? Because till then, though I had these intimations of fatherhood, it wasn't clarified at the level it is now in my system. I was still entertaining what it would be like to not have children and to live a more, I wouldn't say full renunciate, but instead of having children, to develop the majority of my time towards spiritual practice, process, and meditation. And in the realm of meditation, in the meditative and internal arts, people, they become renunciates. They don't have families at the highest level, and they go off and they live in caves, or they take on apprenticeships with masters, and they may or may not see the world depending on how deeply they want to go out or how much they integrate. And there's all kinds of levels as to what that path could look like, and the commitment towards it. Because I'm always like standing in the wake of great teachers who have done that and their level of practice, and then I have to humble myself to know that I can never get to the highest echelons of practice as they have in this life in the way that they have, because some things are just a matter of time. I don't have the time to put in if I'm having a worldly life as I'm planning to now. But I don't need to have that life. And there was a part of me that entertained that. But as I become more and more connected with my internal sense of guidance, I could let that go. And that was, like I mentioned, a big weight of responsibility that came when having children. I also gave away a big piece of responsibility of how far to take these practices, because in the yogic traditions they call it a householder pathway. It's much different than a renunciate. A renunciate renounces the world. A householder maintains a worldly life. So our practices shift in accordance with our dharma, in accordance with our purpose and mission on the planet here. So this was an organizing principle, as I've mentioned, and a motivational mechanism. It activates my motivational energies in accordance with these new patterns. So immediately there was a shift. The shift allowed me to let go of how much I was practicing and the things that I was practicing, so that I could enlist new patterns, new direction, and clarity on that, which allowed me to develop different goals. And there was a whole lot of organization from there, to save you the long story short, because not going too deep into my story, because I wanted to share more about how this can help you. So clarification of goals becomes particularly important because this is the pathway of love. I talk about it in my system as following your highest pathway of love, dharma, and excitement. Now, the pathway of love is the organizing principle. And why love? Because love is, in some sense, the opposite of fear. So the more that I double down, and the more that you double down on the things that you love, and you follow them, you take action on them, and you allow them to be the organizing principle, there's a guidance that comes through from that. And there's a resilience, because if I'm like in this indeterminate state, like I was before, where I was like, kind of want children, kind of don't, I haven't made a decision, and I'm continuing to navigate through the world, making decisions with this uncertainty in me, versus now I have a higher level of certainty, though fears and doubts still arise, and I still have free choice. I don't actually know what's going to happen, but I have so much more momentum going in one stream, and this allows me to anchor in, to stabilize my mind towards this dream, so that I can, at its highest level, breathe it and walk it with every step. And this allows me to be so much more aware of the fear-based beliefs and conditioning, because they are the thoughts that are not dream affirmative. So when we increase our level of clarity on what we are here to do and what our greatest love is, and that picture can be built out. I work a lot with individuals in my coaching in this, and building out the visual, the picture. I draw it quite regularly. I visualize it, I dream it, I talk about it, I make plans for it, and most importantly, I take action on those plans. These put momentum away from the fear-based beliefs and the conditioning. And it's conditioning. There's only so much of it. And the more momentum you have in the direction of your dreams, it's like a rocket taking off into orbit. There's a certain critical threshold of energy that you will break the surface tension. I don't know if this is the right language, of the atmosphere. Surface tension feeling like water, but surface tension of what is holding one back with the fear-based beliefs, yeah? So clarifying what the negative beliefs are, so they're really clear and in the open. And often we have a core negative belief, like the I'm not good enough, that has many other negative beliefs attached to it. Finding the core negative beliefs, identifying them, and then what is the positive belief that we wish to shift to? And then how does this track in accordance with our dharma, in accordance with our dream for this life, because of the lessons that we want to learn? And then we put stock in the motivational mechanism and the actions that propel us towards what we love. And this can break an individual out of those fear-based patterns. that cause so much decalibration of the system so it can't listen to itself and its internal guidance, and de-equilibrium, now I'm just making up words, that throw the system off of balance, and so that we don't have harmony within, and then it's hard to make right decisions in terms of our food and our exercise when internally we're way off balance. So once the mind is established in good form, just making the mental shift isn't enough. We still have all the emotion that's stored in the system from those limiting beliefs. Okay, so it's like you can identify a negative belief and you can see the positive. All the old energy that's stuck in the system from the time in which you laid down those negative beliefs is still stored in the system. So there needs to be energy work done to actually clear out the system. So I'm going to talk about blockages in terms of the emotional and physical aspects. So let's go physical first. Actually, what I did, I have this system that I've created with my coaching. It's part of my intake form, and it's a monthly form that individuals do to recalibrate their holistic alignment. It has 8 major dimensions in which we go over their dream and the chakras and body maps and all these kind of things to get a really in-depth idea of what's happening in the system. So what I did was I looked deeply into my body and I tracked all my imbalances to the best of my knowing. And I have a decent level of awareness of the body system through all the consciousness practices of meditation and yoga that I've done, as well as a good knowledge of body systems through the body work and personal training, etc. that I've done. So I tracked where I hold my habitual tensions. I looked at the metaphysical correlations between these areas. I tracked where I had agonist and antagonist relationships that were out of balance. I looked at my postural system, my phasic system. I looked at my meridians. I tracked where I found blockages. How does one do that? There's many ways to do that. One is simply to tap the whole body, slowly, meticulously, gently at times, hard at others, and find out where the sensitivity is. Now, this could just be physical, but often there are certain energetic lines that will be sensitive. This indicates a blockage. So I tracked where I had these blockages. I know the meridian system, and I could look deeper into 5-element theory, which is one of the primary theories behind traditional Chinese medicine. Anyways, not going to go too deeply into this, but I looked at my system, and then I made a specific care plan for all of these imbalances, above and beyond what I've already been doing in my yogic practices, which is very holistic in nature, but less specific in the treatment of these specific or unique imbalances in the system. Now, it's not just the physical, yeah? Physical is the most gross aspect of ourself, but the subtle informs the gross, which is the mind and the emotions. So I looked for stuck patterns of energy in the system. I used the 5-element theory once again from TCM, and like a simple way to do this without actually for me to explain it in an easy way where you can do it rather than a more in-depth way of actually searching the system through meditation, which would be harder to explain, is to simply look into the 5 negative emotions as proposed by the traditional Chinese medicine system of anger, anxiety, worry, fear, and sadness. And then simply to write out what you have connected to these things. Okay, so I'm like anger. I feel a sense that I'm held back and it's like I'm stuck in certain patterns and limitations, and I feel like I'm like held, like I'm pinned down, and I want to rage and get out of it. And this is due to this financial circumstance because of this belief system. And I mean, I could go too far off on a tangent on this because this is a big part of my work, is understanding the underlying belief systems that guide our actions. For example, I went to school in university and I didn't choose the thing that I actually wanted to do because I didn't think that I was smart enough or I had enough money. So if I go back to that initial belief system that put me on a certain momentum pathway, I can go, oh, there's the I'm not good enough story and I don't have enough. And that put me on this timeline. Oh, now I believe in myself and I know that the universe supports me and I have enough. So that old story that I'd been operating in for that period of time is no longer valid. So now I can shift onto a new timeline. And it can take some time for the whole life to shift, but it can go really quickly too. But it's a beautiful thing to go into these belief systems. But I don't want to take us too far off what I was sharing in terms of the emotions, is to track these emotions and get an understanding of what is triggering these emotions. So we can go with sadness. What are the things that are currently my grievances? And what are the things that I'm currently fearful of? What are the core beliefs? Remember, core beliefs are key. You have many different beliefs, but they stem from a few core beliefs. Now, accessing these are the key to making the big shifts that rewrite the coding in the system. Now, this isn't an episode about rewiring core beliefs, which I believe I have an episode. If not, I have lots of blog posts on that. What to note here is that emotion lives in the body. So not doing the mental belief system reorganizing, for lack of a better word. Doing more of the work of finding these emotions and pulling up the belief system to trigger a piece of that emotion in the body so that we can begin to track it. Because yes, the traditional Chinese medicine system says that the organs are processed by different organ systems. For example, the liver processes anger, and that has a truth to it. So working with the liver energy, not just the liver, but the liver energy, it's really key. It's really different than how the Western views it, because it's an organ system, meaning it comprises of an energy network and not just a local organ. So I just didn't want to confuse everyone by just saying organ. There's something a little different in how they view organs in the body and emotions, etc. But once we can identify the emotion, we can begin to work with the organs, yes, but also what is triggered in the body. For example, when I experience anger, it's often a clenching of my fists and jaw, among other patterns. Now, I do hold some tension in my jaw from time to time, intermittent clenching and grinding patterns. I have a great article on this and the underlying energetics of this and how to work with that. But understanding this, for me, it's another one of these pieces to add into my specific care plan of integrating more practices and physio and yogic exercises to rehabilitate the physical system, the musculature, and the underlying energetic and breathwork practices to release the underlying emotion. And this work is really important to clear out these old stories. Now, part of this will happen naturally. If you're doing this from the level of mind first, and you're doing the work to repattern the system. For example, if I have an old belief that says I don't have enough, and I'm integrating I have enough, I am abundant, I have everything I need when I need it, and I'm shifting that story, what'll happen is you might do this like I'm sitting here on my desk. I might begin the repatterning there. And I might say, I no longer subscribe to that old belief. I empower this new belief. Now, it's most likely not just going to shift and all is gravy after that. Most likely what's going to happen I've begun a new pathway. The neurons begin to fire in a different way, but I had been walking that old pathway as a metaphor, like walking in the snow, and that pathway has been well trodden. Trotted? It's been trod all over in a way that it's easy to walk through. Now, this new pathway is one that I'm still dredging through the snow, so it can take a little bit more work. Not necessarily, because sometimes we find a nice hill and it's the pathway of least resistance, and instead of dredging through the snow, it's like rolling down the hill. Maybe not rolling, maybe skating down the hill or snowboarding down the hill. But sometimes we don't find that pathway right away and we have to walk up the hill first and then we dredge down. Just to play with this metaphor a little bit more. So what that means is we can shift over a story and then it can be like, boom, that story is no longer relevant. The pathway of least resistance, the pathway that's more aligned, not in terms of just you, but in terms of universal principles, something that is more effectively being supported by not just your individual decision, but by the universe. And that can shift and then everything can change quite dramatically. But as I mentioned, sometimes it's like we have to do a lot of work to shift that old narrative. So how would that manifest? So next time I'm, say my vehicle breaks down and I have to pay $10,000. This could potentially trigger that old story of I don't have enough, right? So I have an opportunity in that moment to shift into the new belief system. Now, what would likely happen when that vehicle, let's say I got the bill and I'm like, boom, triggered, that's when the emotion would arise. And so I'm saying if we're doing the work with the belief systems and we're steady and consistent with it, the necessary emotions will arise. And so long as I'm willing to feel those and release those in that moment, I can either detach from them and that can help to clear them, or I can express those emotions and that can release them for the system. Different systems will encourage different things. Like a more meditative tradition will be like detachment from emotion. Whereas some of the more psychotherapeutic and cathartic methods like breath work are more encouraging of express your emotion to discharge the energy. I don't see one as right or wrong. One is more meditation, one is more energy work. I think they're both valid, and I like the pathway for myself that includes both of them to be used intelligently at various times. And at a higher level of integration, I think they're the same thing. Because in order to fully release emotion, you have to detach from it. Otherwise, you're going to express it and you're going to embellish it, and then you're going to, work with it in a way that you're still attached to it, and it will remain a pattern. To express emotion with detachment means I need to discharge the energy of this emotion, but it's not something I'm subscribing to as a pattern that I'm going to continue to enlist, and we can release the conditioning of the way in which we've expressed and experienced those emotions in the body, and we can repattern that at a different level. Once again, don't want to go too far on these tangents, but very interesting stuff for sure. So when we're working with the correct mindset that got us into the reasons why we're getting into these burnout patterns, why we're overworking ourselves, we can begin to shift those, and then we can see the emotions and our triggers come to the surface, and we can rewrite those. We can also do energetic work, like breath work, like work that gets us into the expression and release of emotions. This could be like therapeutic singing and ecstatic dance. I mean, any type of singing and dancing could get you there, but I say therapeutic singing not because it's a thing, but like singing to express emotion with that particular intention. An ecstatic dance, because it's not dance to perform, it's dance to feel, it's dance to express. And these pathways, among literally dozens, thousands of new age techniques and classic techniques that have been around and are found on every continent on the planet, such as dance, are well trodden pathways, you could say. Trotted, you know what I mean by now. So now that we've talked about burnout from the level of mindset and the belief systems that got us in there, and talked a little bit about the emotions and various pathways of releasing those, and then talked about addressing the imbalances in the system. Because imbalances in the system, one more piece there, the imbalances in the system make the system less efficient, make the system less effective. A lot of Qigong and yogic practice is about optimization of the system. It's about fine-tuning the system, the whole system, like the physical, the energetic, the nervous system, so that it functions at a more efficient level. Meaning it can stimulate, it can activate the sympathetic tone, but it can also quickly regulate and come into homeostasis. Or it can drop itself into a deep state of rest. The masters of yoga in all traditions have understood this and taken it to a high level where they can exist without food or water for long periods. Periods that we would think that are impossible. And they can slow their heart rate down, and they can slow their breathing rate down. So much so that they enter a period, a phase, which is like hibernation for the human, where they can exist in this state and their system is just running so efficiently. It's like deeper than the deepest sleep. So this is part of working with these practices of yoga and qigong, is to optimize the system. So even with an optimized system, I've done a fair amount of this work over the years, I still ran into imbalances though. Not because the systems didn't work, because I did the systems wrong. So personal share here before we get into the next piece, which is the patterns that bring us into imbalance and burnout. So I mentioned I had some shame about being a yogi and someone who practices holistic medicine and holistic coaching, and I still ran into burnout. Part of this was because if I had been practicing properly, this wouldn't have happened. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's talk about something specific such as yoga. In the yogic sequencing, there is generally, there's lots of variations of this, but generally you start off with meditation and then pranayama. And then you have a movement practice, which has some kind of crescendo or multiple crescendos of energy. And then you do like a wind down, like a cooling down, you slow things down, and then you enter Shiva Asana or Savasana, this period at the end where you come into complete stillness, you rest, and that integrates. What we do is we learn to ramp up the energy in the system and then take it down. We learn to do all these movement patterns, which are, you could think of like nervous system programs, and then we want to calibrate the system, just like your computer. What happens when you need to make an update? It says, please restart your computer, because we need a full reset once you've done all this programming. And then once you restart the computer, then it's all uploaded. If you don't do a full reset, you have all these information pathways looking to upgrade the system, but you haven't rested, so they're still processing. Processing takes energy. If we're talking about maximizing the efficiency of the system, all these little pathways of thinking and processing and uploading new information and activations, they need to be integrated, and they need to be integrated regularly. So in a yogic practice, we want to come into complete rest at the end of practice, where we drop all practice. Non-governing is a word they use in Qigong. Learning to non-govern, to not control, and to just relax and be. See, most people come into one growth cycle a day. They work all day and then they sleep at night. That's one growth cycle, yeah? And the yogi's like, well, we can have a practice where we can do that multiple times a day. We can work for a bit and then rest. We can work for a bit and rest. And the system runs so much better like this. Now, modern day capitalist society went too far, perhaps, on overemphasizing work and not on rest. not realizing maximum efficiency in the individual system, the human system, requires rest. Pardon me. So I worked in a career where we didn't stop working for 4 hours straight, and it was continuous work, no break, because we're working with people. And then there was lunch, and then you eat and you go right back into it. No time for fully resting the system. Now, this pattern built into me, plus working construction for years before that, where we would work 12-hour plus days, and the harder you worked, the more that your supervisors would like it. So we were always encouraged to work harder and work harder and work harder. This kind of conditioning is not fruitful for a well-balanced life, in my opinion, and it's not the most effective way even to run the system for maximum efficiency. So how did I break this beautiful system of yoga, break the rules of it? Well, two of my biggest sins was not coming into proper shavasana. I rested at the end, but I didn't let my system fully rest. One of the easy ways to tap into this is activation is momentum of energy. It's outward and it wants to keep moving and thinking and all these things that use energy. Where when you shift into deep states of ease and relaxation, the momentum is gone and you don't want to move. So if you're in Shavasana and you lie down for Shavasana and you keep fidgeting and you want to move, and then you get up and you still want to move and you haven't reached the point where it feels in some sense better to stay there, like you want to now just stay there, you probably haven't shifted over your system into a deep state of relaxation, and there's still activation in the system. So I was doing that. I wasn't fully shifting over my system, and I'd become, over the last 3 years when the burnout was getting worse, more physically oriented, more physical movement, less meditation, though daily still, less pranayama, less energy work. So all of these things amounted to less regulation. I wasn't using prana, chi, energy to run my system, and I became addicted to using external energy sources. Some of these were positive, like cold water, these kinds of things, but I was using less my breath, and I was working with caffeine in an addictive relationship, meaning that I knew it wasn't benefiting me to work with every day, and yet I was using it every day. I was only using 50 milligrams at the highest point, and then 25 milligrams. But because my system was already headed towards burnout, even that was too much. And because I practice things that stimulate my system through breath work, once I take caffeine and then I stimulate my system in the morning, it's stimulated all day. Which means I don't get to have those intermittent periods of rest throughout my day that are deeply restorative, because I have a stimulant in my system, and I can't reach a deep state of rest if there's a stimulant in the system. It's just as obvious as that. So as I do work about 12 hours of like movement in a day, most days 5 to 7 days a week, over the years, this began to tax the system. Now, it's not that I couldn't do almost everything that I had done over these last few years if I would have done a little bit less movement and had more Shavasana. That really would have solved a lot of my problems over the last few years. That's just the reality that I had to live with. And I'm like, don't! So now I've since course corrected. I've been off caffeine for over 6 months. And actually I have had it a little bit to test it out, and my body's still like, nope. And I've developed my meditation and pranayama practice, and I've actually hardly done any physical intense, like high intensity work in the past 6 months plus. And just to develop that side that I had began to neglect because of becoming more physically oriented. I'm not going to go into why that'll happen. This is not just the podcast about my story. I do want to talk more about actions and patterns to offer you some insight on where you may be out of alignment with your pathways and patterns, especially if you don't have a yogic practice. Yeah. So once I got into fine tuning my energy, I was in a period of depletion at the height of this. I actually went through a complete mental breakdown, which was partly due to the burnout, but that was just another piece that was co-occurring with a lot of other stuff on my plate at the time. I won't go too deeply into that. Once again, don't want to sidetrack us. But I experienced, panic attacks and bouts of anger. And part of this was old belief systems coming to the surface, triggering and being released. Part of this was, it was a lot of like the fear of those fear-based belief systems had to come out. Like pus has to come to the surface. And the burnout and the flatline that I experienced, particularly for a month, was so intense, well, like 2 months, pardon me, was so intense that I broke too much pressure in the system. It just had a mental breakdown. That's what it was. I won't go too deeply into that, so let's move on. Another podcast for another day. Anyways, so I was in such a depleted state that I had to move through the world in a way where I could manage my energy, because I couldn't just drop everything that I was doing. I dropped, 60% of what I was doing, and things that I had not been willing to drop before, but now that I just couldn't do them energetically, I was like, I have to. I wouldn't have dropped them otherwise. And this included things like podcasting, things like YouTubing, all these other things that I had picked up over the years. But what I did was I began to move like I was 99 years old. Not always, but I began to move so slow. And then I began to breathe like a turtle. And I practice breath work throughout my day, not just the periods of practice that I do in the morning and the evening, and generally one in the afternoon. But once again, because there was stress in my system, I began to do more breath of fire and stimulating techniques because I was tired and I wanted energy. This was unintelligent. My system wanted to slow down, and I kept needing to push myself because I kept saying yes to things. See how the belief systems and the fear continues to push and push and push, sending momentum in the direction where we think we need to go, but we don't actually need to. Anyways, I needed to slow my breath down, so I started to breathe like a turtle and slow my breath down. Alternate nostril breathing. Began to eat much slower. Stress caused me to eat like a pig. Eating out of stress, not mindfully eating. Began to massage my body. Began to signal to my body that it's safe by touching it slowly. Massaging out all of those imbalances, those physical holding patterns. Once again, pathways and things that I had been doing before, but now I needed the energy, and I realized that these things work. So I doubled down on them, and I spent more and more time doing them, because I got into a phase where I was like, I want more energy, and I'm just going to do the relaxation stuff so that I have more energy to continue to do more things. I might have said that in the beginning. But that was my whole stream. And now I'm like, I love relaxation. I forgot how much I love relaxation. Like I used to be a spa king, going to saunas and meditating. And once I got into the work world, then the never enough stories came on. That was no longer a justifiable thing in my mind, because I wanted to continue to work and work and work. So there are patterns in your life which you can optimize through simple techniques of moving slower, of self-massage, of learning acupuncture trigger points that can help you to release stress. When I get in my head, I know there's trigger points for that. When I'm in my head, I know where to massage for that. If I want to optimize my digestion, I know how to breathe and I know how to massage my belly. Very simple things. So simple. And then what are the other patterns? So for me, caffeine, no go. And I had got into, once again, a lot of this stuff. It's like we all have control patterns that are triggered through stress when we have stress behaviors. These are our control patterns that bring us some sense of safety or numbing that help us to maintain a sense of equilibrium, but typically these are not the most advantageous patterns. They're not actually dealing with the root cause of the emotions that are being triggered, which are setting off these control patterns. So, for example, sometimes I meditate as a control pattern to avoid and numb. And sometimes I meditate with a genuineness to feel and be present. Same pattern. You think meditation, you think, oh, positive, this is good. Anything can be used as an improper pattern, yeah? So it's like, what's running the system and what is the intention there? So everyone has a set of control patterns, and getting to know your control patterns is really key. Common ones are food, social media, and television, as well as other drugs, you could say, even plant medicines, which can be used as escape, sex, all kinds of things, yeah? So understanding what particular patterns you go to when you have stress and making these really clear, as with the mindset, to identify it so that when it comes up, you can check in. Otherwise, unconsciousness will take over and it's like a cloud in your awareness. And often when we're in unconsciousness, things speed up in the sense that we do one thing and we do another and we do another, and there's no pause, there's no integration, there's no shavasana, there's no rest in between. It's like desire after desire after desire, one after another, and yet there's no fulfillment. Fulfillment means I can stop because contentment is within me. So there can be more time to pause. When I was doing my rehabilitation of the patterns, I went away for a meditation retreat with the Vipassana meditation and did some volunteering, put away my phone and just sat with reality, sat with my breath for hours till I got back into not chasing desires. And desires aren't something I'm putting down. I think desires are a natural part of life and they're a beautiful thing. But when the desires are not serving us, or they're coming as a control pattern to numb the system rather than to pursue desires that bring about alignment and dharma and fulfillment and inward connection, that's different than a desire that is coming up out of an avoidance or a selfish desire, like something that is just rooted in stress and imbalance rather than love. What else helped me? Supplementation helped me. I used magnesium to calm my system, as well as multivitamin, particularly zinc, good for testosterone support with vitamin C in it. And I had some leftover B vitamins, and there was a sleep vitamin mix that I worked with for a little bit. These things helped. Nothing too dramatic, but all part. Everything plays a part. I shifted my diet because I wasn't exercising as much, which I work with a lot more meat and other heavier sources of food, which are heavier meaning slower on the digestion. I ate a lot lighter and less for a little bit, and this brought more energy to the system. Which brings me to the Big 8. So this is part of what I mentioned as my holistic assessment in helping people to get a good snapshot picture of where they're at in life, and the Big 8 is part of that. The Big 8 is breathing, drinking, eating, moving, thinking, sleeping, and then happiness and introspection. So these are basic life rhythms, and these are things to look at. How's your breathing? What patterns do you want to focus on this week? How's your drinking? Are you drinking enough clear, pure, good water? The best solution for pollution is dilution. It's something I heard from Paul Chek. I don't know if he's the author of that phrase. And we have eating optimization. Not going to go too deeply into that because we're already over an hour, though I could dive deeply into that topic. We have thinking patterns, talked about that in terms of mindset and belief systems. Movement patterns, talked a little bit that about choosing the right activities, slowing the movement down. I'll talk a little bit more about that one actually. So when I got burnout, I stopped doing all high intensity training. I didn't completely stop working out, but I stopped it for a bit, and then I integrated very lightweight and focused on my alignments and balancing out my system between agonist and antagonist systems in my posture, rather than focusing on strength and doing 1MRs and all these things that aren't going to be supportive of the system, the regulating the nervous system, yeah? And then I focused more on yogic practice. When I wanted to move a little bit more energy, it was more of a power or vinyasa, just practice in a way that was more sensitive to what was happening in my system. There's a way that the Chinese talk about this in terms of qigong and exercise. I don't remember it exactly, but I'm just gonna freestyle and see if I can remember as I go. They have different ways of exercising for different parts of the year. For example, in summer, this is like peak yang, sun's out, energy's out. This is when we can work out and sweat and pant, meaning breathing in and out of the mouth, like that. Whereas in the autumn and then in the spring, it's like workout, you can sweat, but don't pant. So not huffing, puffing, not as intense. And then in the winter, you can work out, but don't sweat, don't pant. So that's just a general thing that they would say that teaches us, most of nature takes hibernation in the winter. There's a cycle, and we don't just go buck wild all year round, because that's going to energetically be very taxing for the system. And the light and the sun, if you live in Canada, we have seasons that are much different than different parts of the world. So I don't know what it would be like in a different part of the world, but the sun's out, more prana, more energy. And when we're in winter, less energy in the environment, less conducive for these kinds of things. So I took that to heart, and I didn't do things that were really intense, though I sweat quite a bit because I was doing hot yoga, which is in a hot room. So it's different than sweating due to exertion versus just sweating because you're in a hot room. So I slowed down my activities. As I mentioned, I focused a lot more on meditation and energy work practices. I did a 5-month deep dive of Qigong, where I was doing Qigong lessons every week and schooling, and did some programs, learning new Qigong forms. So that was my major focus. So it's so important to know that exercise, though it can have an anti-stress effect, it is a stressor. So we want to use it like medicine. We want to use it in a prescriptive amount, the right kinds of exercise, the right intensity of exercise. Because if the system is overly stressed to the point of burnout, it's not so much hermetic, meaning positive stress. It's going to be deleterious stress. So if I started to work out really hard, that would just tax my adrenals out even more. Whereas if somebody's healthy and they can stress out their system a bit during a workout, they'll come out of that workout decompressed and de-stressed. So it's all about how much energy you have in the tank. It's all about choosing the right things. So you want to be very sensitive to which movement patterns to choose and when. And as I did talk a little bit about, choosing to practice them properly. This goes for working out as much as it does for yogic practice. Is when you have a workout, you stimulate your system. If you don't rest after, You've built up a sympathetic tone in your system, and if you don't rest, that's going to continue. It's going to continue till you rest eventually. But we can optimize the efficiency of our system by coming into a deeper rest. And like most people eat after they work out. If you're still very sympathetic, you're not in your rest and digest system, so you're not going to digest your nutrients and get the proper absorption either. So this just comes down to refining and fine tuning. A lot of this for me, it was like, I'm 34 years old and I'm no longer in my 20s. And it's like, okay, I don't have an infinite amount of energy, which it seems like when I'm in my my teens and my 20s. So now it's like, okay, how do I refine? I can still output like I could in my 20s, but there's a more of a reserve of energy. Now there's more of a refinement of the system and a realization that in my 30s, with the amount of things that I parallel process and take on, I can completely burn out my system if I'm not practicing good energy management. And the whole, like some of the teachings for myself, okay, I won't go into that. Don't done the big eight. Sorry. I get very excited on all the tangents because I'm an air type and my mind is creative, you could say, all over the place. Sometimes straight, but a lot of creativity all over the place. So we have the big eight, and I got up to moving. The last one is sleeping, happiness, and introspection. So sleeping, optimizing sleep hygiene. Not going to go too deeply into that. You can probably watch a great Andrew Huberman podcast for going deep into that. Stick to some basic things. Know what you're doing that's affecting your sleep would be the biggest thing, and stop doing that. I started working late into the night on my phone, and I would take my phone into my bed, and that's when I would finish up my last bit of voice notes and messages, and that's not a good habit. So I stopped doing it. Things like that. Let's go into happiness. That one's less obvious. This is from, by the way, Paul Chek's 4-doctor system. He calls them Dr. Happiness and Dr. Quiet. And then this is his 6 holistic health principles. Now I've just added 2 from his 4-doctor system onto the 6. So they're all his work that's been explained by him. And I'm just working with the system in a little bit of a different way. For him, Dr. Happiness is doing the things you love. So this is part of our holistic health. This is part of what we schedule in our weeks, is making sure there's time for your happiness. As I mentioned, this is like our love. This is the motivational mechanism and the organizing principle. When we're happy and feeling good, this is going to help us to organize all the other practices. So I wasn't making enough time to have a personal and social life outside of my work and practices. Because once again, fear-based belief systems, not feeling like I had enough, doing enough. So I'm not going to go see friends when I still need to book clients in because I have big bills to pay. That had been my justification for the first years. And then I realized that I'm actually much more productive as a human being, more creative, more aligned. I do much better work when I have friends in my life, and I'm regularly seeing that. And that's so nourishing for the deepest parts of me, and it encourages me. And the pattern that I got into was just working all the time. I don't network and I don't get out. I'm very introverted. I could just burrow myself in my meditation and not go out if I wasn't compelled to for a while, for sure. So that becomes a big part of integrating the big picture. I'll put a flag there and see if I can touch back into it when I share a little bit more about some of my reflections about burnout and what I've been learning. The last one is Dr. Quiet. And this is time for introspection and reflection and rest. And obviously I had been disrespecting Dr. Quiet a lot. And this isn't, once again, to say that I hadn't been doing self massage and daily meditation and spending time to introspect using my coaching systems. It's just that I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't adequately respecting my need for rest and living a balanced life because I was still operating on some fear-based beliefs that had taken over my guidance and my ability to make good decisions. Because I had been operating from that place, I didn't value the introspective time and I didn't prioritize it in that way. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay, so let's do a review of what I've shared so far, and then I'll get into some of my personal reflections and insights into what this burnout has taught me and why I'm grateful that it happened. So one of the biggest things, most important things when addressing burnout is mindset, fear-based beliefs that drive fight or flight, that drive survival response. These can be pernicious because we can make all of these shifts with our diet. And as I mentioned, I am a holistic coach, practice holistic medicine and practice yoga daily. And I still ran into these because when the survival mechanisms begin to take over the consciousness by triggering cortisol and stress in the system, that begins to shift the decision making, that begins to change the priorities. So it's so important to identify what an individual's goals are, their dreams are, and then to assess the belief systems that they're operating from and the ideal belief systems and begin to do this work of repatterning. A lot of this conditioning, a lot of the belief systems are conditioning. For example, my dad was a hard worker. My grandfather was a hard worker. They both worked themselves, in my opinion, into diseases, and in my grandfather's case, an early death. These are passed on familial, ancestral patterns that had served, perhaps at a time. Now, in our modern day, and in the present application of my life, these patterns are not the most advantageous. And with any pattern, it can have a positive and a negative, depends on how it's being applied. So, understanding the belief systems that get us into this kind of trouble, because ultimately what we believe, not just what we think here and there, ultimately the fundamental belief systems, the axioms of decision making are what are the template for which we live. That's what eventually becomes the manifest reality. When we truly do the work to shift the fundamental belief systems, this is when we can create change within ourselves and within the way we live at the deepest level. Because it's not what is outside of us, it's how we react to it, it's how we respond to it, and this is due to the conditioning in the system, yeah? So our belief systems, so primary if we want to get to the root cause of burnout, because as I mentioned, I've had this for 5 years, 3 years more notably, where I began to feel it. And I went into intermittent periods of burnout. And what I would do is I would go superficial. I would rest for a bit, and then I would come back in and continue the same patterns. I'd rest for a bit, and then I'd do what I needed to do so I could continue doing the things that I'd been doing, which have been putting me in these patterns. Get a little bit smarter, and then get dumb. You know? So when I finally said enough is enough and got down to what are the belief systems that got me into this, it's time for them to end because I can't do this anymore. The next time this hits, if it hits again, it's going to be serious. So I got real with myself, and then that's when the shift happened. Don't go to the end that I did. Please. For yourself, not for me. For yourself. So clarifying goals is so important for this. As I shared my personal story about the confirmation within me to have children and how this acts as a motivational mechanism and a guiding principle for action. This is so important for regulating our time, but also as the motivational mechanism for being a source of inspiration. Because if I'm just single and just taking care of me and serving, I'm so much less aware, because the pattern that I had gotten myself into a few times is I can just give and give and give, which ultimately ends in burnout. But it's like, I'm here to give. Why not just give and give and give and then die? If I have to die young, I die young. It's that kind of like immature mind, which has a kind of like fierce devotion to it, sure. But once I start thinking like, oh, I'm going to want to give and give and give, and I also want to live a long time because I want to see my children grow old, then it's like, oh, and I want to be healthy and a happy person and not just giving and giving and giving and grumpy. Yeah. So there's a whole different system that becomes online when the responsibility comes from the goals that we create for ourselves. Because when we have sufficiently big dreams and goals, they ask so much more of ourselves than we're currently asking of ourselves. And as we continue to expand our goals and our dreams, we'll continue to increase what is possible for us and what is asked of us in a good way, because we'll grow and we'll grow and we'll grow and we'll grow. And hopefully become wiser and more refined as we go. So we have the mindset, we have clarifying the goals, we have addressing the physical imbalances in the body, as well as the blocked negative emotion and the traumas in the system. So we want to know what's happening in the system that's causing inefficiency. Where are these blockages? Because they're not just physical. These are the body's messages to us about what is happening underneath, referring to belief system, blockages, emotions, these kind of things that are trapped in the system. I could talk about these from many different angles, but they prevent the free flow of energy and information. They prevent us from hearing our internal guidance, like the good guidance, not the fear-induced survival mechanism guidance, yeah? So we need to clear out the stagnancy of emotion. Now, in the case of burnout, this is when it gets worse, right? Low energy, low vibration, low density emotions. You know, when I had my burnout, I mentioned I had a mental breakdown. Intense negative emotions, and through it, this is the most potent time in some sense to shift into positive belief systems and to truly practice mental resiliency. When the physical system is depleted, it has a tendency towards low and negative emotion. But when I started to anchor in on the things that truly brought me light, such as the future with my family, that was enough to pull me into a positive state. Now, in that state, all those other control patterns, remember I talked about control patterns, those didn't work. Shoving my face with food, didn't work. Any other pattern, getting high, ain't gonna solve this problem. Not today, sucker. And as I continued to go through all the patterns that I could have possibly experimented with, and fortunately I didn't go into really dark patterns, like back in the day that I might have, but they won't work. They hadn't been working realistically, but I hadn't been in a severe enough circumstance and situation internally that I could see that. But when things got really dark, the things that truly helped to uplift me, who truly uplifted the motivational mechanisms for me to change, those became so much more obvious. Okay? And we want to work with supplementation. We want to do everything we can possibly do if we're in a state of burnout. And if we have a big enough goal before we get to burnout, just to do all these things to live a most beneficial life for ourselves and for other people. I mentioned the big 8. I'm not going to go over these. Those are the holistic health principles. I mentioned the 8 dimensions of holistic alignment, the coaching form that I have for individuals to fill out. If you want any information on either of these, you can always reach out. In the last little bit of this episode, let's get to some of the things that I've learned. Now I could make a whole episode on this, and we're already at an hour and 24 minutes and 44 seconds. Make a wish. So, what did I learn? One of the biggest takeaways is I've been working in the past 6 months to align my behaviors more and more with universal principles. And one of the systems that I've worked with is the 7 Hermetic Principles. Might not be able to say these off the top of my head, but let's give it a shot. All is one. Law of correspondence, as above, so below. Everything is vibration. Everything has cycles and rhythms. Everything has polarity. There is the masculine and the feminine polarities in all things. And what I give is what I receive. And I think that's 6. Can't remember the other one. Not necessary at this moment. And as I align more and more these principles to my actions as opposed to conditioning, it's teaching me to live in greater harmony with what the Taoists would call the Tao, what the Buddhists would call the Dhamma, which the yogis would call the Dharma, the universal law, the way things are, the way that the earth is and the cycles of the planet, the way that it's not about what I put out, not just about what I put out, it's about my vibration as I'm putting it out. That's the cause and effect. That's giving and receiving. Because a lot of the stuff I put out over the years, especially in the beginning, was motivated based of fear, because I was in a survival state, because I felt I needed to get clients in order to survive. So the energy behind that is completely off. So part of this allowed me to do a big reset in how I put out energy and what the vibration is, and being more focused on putting out quality content, not even just in terms of the quality of the video, for example, but the quality of my vibration and showing up in a really good place. And part of the work that I did in the last 2 years, I've done Vipassanas, like service, like serving Vipassana every about 4 months. And I do that out of volunteering to meditate and to serve, not for money, but just to reprogram my mind. This is what it feels like to give for love, to just be at peace in my work, be at peace in my meditation, and then to integrate more and more of that as I do energy exchange through finances, through abundance. So part of this period of burnout was a big piece of integration. It was my big Shavasana. I told you I hadn't been taking proper Shavasanas. Boom. Life's like, you got them all banked up. Now take them. It was my make it or break it. And I broke. And I'm still going to make it. So coming up on the end of this, after the mental breakdown, which was a very beautiful thing, because if you're not spiritual, a mental breakdown is a mental breakdown. Fuck, it sucks. But if you're spiritual, a mental breakdown is like, whee! It's like a roller coaster. At times, it sucks just as much as anyone else would experience. It sucks because things that suck. But when I can also be an eagle and look down from an eagle eye perspective, I can see, oh, I'm having a spiritual breakthrough. This is one of the biggest shifts in my life. I can embrace this as well. And to the degree I'm willing to feel these negative emotions, that's going to activate my internal guidance system in the opposite way. Because when I know what I don't want, damn well sure I know what I do want now. I went from feeling not so certain about some things like marriage and children to feeling, oh fuck, I'm certain. So much so that, oh, that's happening. Now I got to make some big shifts because they're real and they're here. It's like, as I mentioned, it's like I got someone pregnant already. Don't even know who my future partner is. And it's like, boom, that's the reality of knowing when you know. So some big shifts happen there. And my capacity to feel those emotions shows I'm willing to. I might have been holding a lot of that stuff for my whole life, if not for many lives. And I just bottled up all that stuff. And it took me to have a complete breakdown in order to be willing to surrender to the depth of that emotion, to go through it and to resource myself with all that I have accomplished in the past few years, such as a beautiful network of friends and places that I can go. When I have a nervous breakdown, I'm supported within myself and within my community and my close relationships. Wow, what a testament. What an amazing experience. What a blessing to go through, to go into such a weak and frail time, feeling so much fear and shame within myself, and knowing that I had the practices within me. I have internal guidance that's coming on stronger and stronger. I have friends and family and a support and community network that's so strong that can hold me when I break down. This is how we grow. We have to break down to grow. That's how muscles grow. That's how everything grows. It's how the seasons go. Once again, 7 Hermetic principles. This is just me coming into alignment with the universe. Everything that was out of alignment, boom, brought to the surface. I say I want awakening. I say it one day. The next day I'm like, I don't want it. It's too hard. You've already signed up for it. The ball's already in motion, pardon me. So it's been a blessing. It's been an incredible blessing. And as I mentioned, there were so many patterns that I had gotten into based on fear, becoming excessively physical because it was harder to meditate and slow down when I had so much fear in like, I'm not enough and I'm not doing enough in my system. Now my level of meditation, oh my goodness, I don't even know if I was meditating for the past decade. Now I can actually enter into the state of meditation, true meditation, absorption, jhanas. Wow, what a blessing. It took all those years of hard work as preparatory practice just to enter into a beautiful state like this. Well worth it. Well worth it indeed. And because I've gone so deeply into this, like once I started to drop in and be like, okay, let's track this process, my mind and memory started to expand. I was like, okay, I can track this 3 years, 5 years. Oh, I see this pattern in my dad. I started to see not only to the extent of my lifetime, but into the multi-generations of passed on patterns within me. That's a kind of inner wisdom and inner sight, which I didn't have access to before. And I have much more clarity to do that now, not only with this process, but with other processes. Yeah? So this is a gift. This is an incredible gift. This is why I chose to have this imbalance. And when I can say that, then it means that I'm surrendered to it, yeah? It's not something that happened to me. It's not something that was out of my control. I looked at all the mistakes that I chose to make for my own learning. And now I get to have the benefits, the wisdom from them. And I get to know very deeply how I got myself in it and how to get myself out. And even where I'm at now, not 100%, but I feel great. I can do all the things that I need to do when I need to do them. And I can continue along these pathways of development in alignment with higher universal principles. And I can trust that so long as I'm acting in accordance with these, my system's going to run so much more effective and optimized, better than it's ever been. And I'll be stronger than I've ever been soon enough. And I get to help other people now. If I wouldn't have gone through this to the depth that I gone through that, I would have less standing to be able to understand where other people go in. Now, when somebody else comes to me and they say they have burnout, such as many of my entrepreneur friends who talk about burnout, I'm like, I got a lot of information for you. Let's do a drop down. Let's look at your mindset, your goals, your emotions, your actions, your imbalances, your supplementation. Let's bring you through the big 8 and the 8 dimensions of holistic alignment. It's all right there for me. Wow, what a blessing. There's so much wisdom. As I mentioned, I could do a whole podcast out of it. So our greatest challenges are opportunities for growth. This was one of the themes in the last Sweat Lodge and Community Breath that me and Vern Petty led the other week. What are your challenges and how are they opportunities for growth? That's the mindset. When we step out of the child, which is like things are happening to me, and into the adult, which says I choose. Why do we choose? From a higher level, of course. to call in diseases, call in cancers, call in whatever is affecting us. And because we want to learn from it. We're doing this for our own good. So we're not victims in that way of scheming things, yeah? So burnout, it's been a good ride. I've enjoyed you. You've taught me lots. I'm done with you. I don't subscribe anymore. So in the future, my mind is clear. I am enough. I have enough time to do what I need to do. I'm going to connect with my inner guidance to know when enough is enough. And I'm going to look at how I manage my time, because I have big dreams with my business, as a husband, as a father, as a community member, as somebody who carries on lineages and various practices in the internal arts. I have a lot to offer this world. And I want to live in accordance with universal principles and be in harmony each moment, not as like a vehicle to get towards some goal outside of this moment, to live in harmony now with my patterns and pathways, because I want to pass this stuff on to my children, not even just my children, to the children of this universe, to the children of this world. So I'm clarifying my goals, and I'm looking in with what is most important to organize my life and my behaviors. And I'm looking at what's out of alignment. What negative emotions am I holding? What are the imbalances in my body? And I'm addressing each and every one in due diligence and in their due time. I'm looking at all my actions and patterns and pathways. One of my behaviors, because I am single and I live alone, is I will sometimes visualize that my children are here with me and they're watching me. Am I slouching? Am I doing things that I wouldn't want them to do? There's like an extra eye, a higher level of consciousness guiding me. Everyone's got their own pathway and patterns. So finding something that enlists motivation in you. I'm working and continuing to supplement my body and do the things that I need to do to live a more balanced and regulated life. So if you're experiencing burnout, adrenal fatigue, if you're feeling exhausted, if the weight of the world is taxing on your nervous system and you're looking for practices or deep dive into understanding how stress affects the system, because it's not just mental emotional stress, it's electromagnetic stress, it's chemical stress. There's so many stressors that are taxing our system, and there's pathways towards mitigating those stress so that we can live in our modern world and we can thrive in our modern world. This is all for today. Thank you for listening. Aya Om.